A bathtub just disappeared into the floor. That's what Mexican Marines found when they stormed a luxury condo in Mazatlan, a hydraulic escape hatch built directly under a porcelain tub, leading to a tunnel system so sophisticated it had lighting, ventilation, and multiple exit points into the city's storm drains. But this was not some Hollywood movie set. This was real. This was how the most wanted man in the world stayed free for over a decade. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman did not just build hideouts, he built an underground empire. We are talking about hundreds of safe houses across Mexico, each one a fortress disguised as an ordinary home. Tunnel networks that would make engineers jealous. Escape routes that led through sewers, under rivers, and straight into the Pacific Ocean. And luxury compounds so extravagant they had private zoos, armored vehicles, and panic rooms that could withstand military assault. This was not just about hiding, it was about engineering freedom itself. The Mexican government spent millions hunting him. The DEA made him their top priority. Interpol had him on every watch list. And yet, time after time, El Chapo vanished like smoke. Because while law enforcement was kicking down front doors, he was already 3 blocks away, sliding through tunnels that should not exist into safe houses that look like every other building on the block. But here is what nobody talks about. How did a kid from a dirt-poor mining town in the Sierra Madre Mountains become the architect of the most elaborate escape network in criminal history? How did he know exactly where to build, who to trust, and when to run? Stay with me until the end, because we are going deep into the blueprint of his empire. We are breaking down every safe house, every tunnel, every last-second escape, from the adobe ranches of his childhood to the luxury mansions where he entertained celebrities, to that final desperate run through a sewage tunnel in his underwear. This is the complete architectural breakdown of how El Chapo became a ghost. Let's break it down. Before El Chapo became a legend, he was just Joaquin Guzman Loera, born in 1957 in La Tuna, Badiraguato, a village so remote you can barely find it on a map. We are talking about extreme poverty, no running water, dirt floors, a father who beat him regularly and kicked him out of school by 3rd grade. But here is what most people miss about La Tuna. It was not just poor, it was strategic. The Sierra Madre Mountains, where Chapo grew up, are not just beautiful. They are a natural fortress. 1,000-foot cliffs, dense forest coverage, caves and ravines that have hidden smugglers since the Spanish colonial era. The Mexican government could not control these mountains in the 1700s, and they still struggle today. Chapo's family grew marijuana and opium poppies to survive. Every man in the region did. And from the time he could walk, Chapo learned something critical. The man who knows the terrain survives. The man who builds the right hideout never gets caught. Think about that for a moment. While other kids were playing, Chapo was learning escape routes. He watched his uncles hide product in caves during raids. He saw how the old-timers used mule trails that wound through canyons, invisible from the air. He learned that in the mountains, you do not need steel doors or armed guards. You need knowledge. You need to become part of the landscape itself. His first smuggling runs were simple, carrying marijuana down mountain paths to distribution points. But what separated Chapo from every other small-time trafficker was his obsession with infrastructure. Even as a teenager, he was not just thinking about the drugs. He was thinking about the route, the hiding spots, the backup plan. By his early 20s, Chapo had already built his first real safe house, a small adobe structure tucked into a canyon near La Tuna. Nothing fancy, just thick walls, minimal windows, and something nobody else had thought of at the time: a hidden room behind a false wall where he could disappear if soldiers came up the trail. That hidden room was the seed of everything that came after. Because what El Chapo understood, before anyone else was this. In the drug trade, transportation is everything, and the man who controls the transportation routes, the tunnels, the safe houses, the escape hatches, controls the entire game. The Sierra Madre taught him that. The mountains became his university, and survival was the only subject that mattered. Let me tell you about the evolution of El Chapo's early hideouts, because this is where you see the blueprint taking shape. In the 1980s, when Chapo was rising through the Guadalajara cartel, he started building a network of rural safe houses across Sinaloa. These were not the luxury compounds that would come later. These were working hideouts, functional, clever, and almost impossible to raise successfully. Picture this: adobe ranch-style homes that looked exactly like every other farmhouse in rural Sinaloa. Same corrugated metal roofs, same dusty courtyards, same chickens running around outside. You could drive past one and never give it a second glance. But inside, that's where the magic happened. Chapo began installing trapdoors everywhere, under beds, beneath kitchen floor tiles, behind closets. He'd cut through the concrete foundation and build small chambers, just big enough for a man to drop into and pull a rug back over the opening. Some of these spaces connected to storm drains. Others led to irrigation canals that farmers used for their fields. The genius was in the ordinariness. Mexican federal police would raid these properties, expecting concrete bunkers and armed resistance. Instead, they'd find an empty house, maybe an old woman cooking tortillas. By the time they started pulling up floorboards, Chapo was already half a mile away, crawling through an irrigation tunnel that dumped him out in a cornfield. One of his early safe houses near Culiacan had something absolutely brilliant: a fake wall behind a clothes closet. You'd push on a specific panel, and the entire back wall would swing open into a hidden room about 8 feet square. Inside that room, another trapdoor leading down into the municipal sewer system. Think about the layers there. The police get past the front door, they still have to find the hidden room. They find the hidden room, they still have to figure out he went down into the sewers. And by that time, Chapo's already emerging 3 blocks away through a different exit. But here's where it gets interesting. Chapo did not just build these safe houses randomly. He built them in concentric circles around his primary locations. If heat came down on one house, he'd move to the next ring. If that got compromised, he'd move again. It was like a chess game where he always had 6 moves planned ahead. And these early houses established something crucial: his operational security protocol. Only trusted family members knew the locations. Only his inner circle knew about the tunnels. Guards were rotated constantly, so no one person knew the full layout of his network. These were not just hideouts. They were the foundation of a system that would eventually span entire cities. Now we get to the part that changed everything. The part that made El Chapo not just another drug lord, but an engineering phenomenon. Tunnels, not simple holes in the ground. We're talking about sophisticated underground transportation networks that would make civil engineers stop and stare. Chapo did not invent drug tunnels. Smugglers had been digging under the United States-Mexico border since the 1980s. But what he did was revolutionize them. He turned tunnels from a smuggling tactic into an art form. Here is how it started. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Chapo realized something that should have been obvious, but somehow was not. The United States-Mexico border was the most heavily monitored piece of real estate in North America. Walls, sensors, cameras, border patrol agents everywhere. But nobody was looking down. So Chapo started recruiting, not just laborers, but actual mining engineers, men who had worked in Mexico's copper and silver mines, men who understood soil stability, ventilation systems, and structural support. He paid them incredible money, sometimes $50,000 per tunnel, and gave them one directive: build me a highway underground. The first major tunnel was discovered in 1993, running from Tijuana to a warehouse in San Diego. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, authorities found over 150 tunnels connected to El Chapo's organization, and those are just the ones they found. Let me paint you a picture of what these tunnels actually look like, because the word tunnel does not do them justice. Some of them ran for over half a mile underground. They had concrete floors and reinforced walls. They had ventilation shafts every 100 feet so workers would not suffocate. They had electric lighting powered by generators. They had drainage systems for groundwater. Some of the later tunnels even had rail systems with actual mining carts on tracks that could move hundreds of pounds of product at once. The sophistication was astonishing. Engineers used ground-penetrating radar to avoid sewage lines and utility tunnels. They shored up the walls with timber and steel beams. They installed communication lines so guards at both ends could coordinate, and they disguised the entrances brilliantly. One tunnel in Mexicali started inside a pool table at a residential house. But here is what made El Chapo's tunnel network truly revolutionary. He did not just build them for smuggling, he built them for escape. Authorities started finding tunnels that connected his safe houses to the city's existing infrastructure. A house in Culiacan had a tunnel that led to the storm drain system, which then connected to 6 different exit points across the city. Another compound had an underground passage that ran 2 blocks to a commercial building where Chapo could emerge looking like a regular businessman and disappear into traffic. The tunnels made him almost impossible to capture. Police could have perfect intelligence. They could surround a building with 100 men, and Chapo would still vanish. While they were breaching the front door, he was already underground, moving through a network that only he and his most trusted people knew about. And the psychological impact? Massive. Law enforcement knew about the tunnels. They knew Chapo could disappear at any moment. But knowing and stopping it were 2 completely different things. You can't stake out every storm drain in a city. You can't monitor every irrigation canal. The tunnels gave Chapo something more valuable than invisibility. They gave him time. Time to run. Time to regroup. Time to disappear into the next safe house on his network. This was the revolution. This was why he became legendary. By the 2000s, El Chapo was not just building safe houses anymore. He was building an invisible empire across Mexico's most strategic cities. Let me walk you through the key locations, because each one tells a different part of the story. Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, was Chapo's home base. This was his kingdom. Across the city, he maintained a network of at least 30 active safe houses at any given time. The genius of Culiacan was the disguise. These were not mansions and gated communities. They were modest homes in middle-class neighborhoods, 2-bedroom houses with small yards and faded paint, the kind of place where a factory worker might live with his family. But inside military-grade security, one safe house raided in 2012 looked like an ordinary residence from the street. Inside, authorities found steel-reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, and a security camera system that covered every angle of approach. The bathtub in the master bathroom was mounted on hydraulics. Push a button, and it lifted up, revealing a tunnel entrance. That tunnel ran 150 feet underground to a storm drain that connected to 4 different exit points. Another house had something even more elaborate. The refrigerator in the kitchen was a fake. Pull it forward, and there was a ladder leading down into a tunnel system that branched like a subway network. One branch led to a warehouse district. Another came up inside a mechanic's shop. The third connected to the city's actual sewer system. The sophistication in Culiacan reached the point where Mexican Marines started bringing tunnel detection specialists on raids, but even that did not help much because Chapo's engineers were constantly improving. They started adding false tunnels that led nowhere, just to waste time and resources. They built decoy safe rooms that looked legitimate but were actually designed to be found, while the real escape route was somewhere else entirely. Mazatlan was different. This was Chapo's vacation spot, the place where he went to relax, to meet with his mistresses, to feel like a normal person for a few days. But even in paradise, Chapo never stopped planning his escape. The condo building where he was finally captured in 2014, let me tell you about that place. From the outside, it was just another mid-rise building 2 blocks from the beach. Tourists walked past it every day. Inside, Chapo had transformed his unit into a fortress. The front door was steel reinforced. The windows had bulletproof glass. Security cameras covered the hallways. But the real feature was in the master bathroom, the hydraulic bathtub I mentioned earlier. When Mexican Marines stormed the building on February 22, 2014, Chapo heard them coming. He hit the button. The bathtub lifted up, and he dropped down into a tunnel that ran underneath the entire block. That tunnel connected to Mazatlan's storm drain system, which meant he could emerge anywhere along the beach, and he almost made it. He actually escaped that day, running through storm drains in the dark, coming up 3 blocks away and carjacking a vehicle. It took 2 more days and a massive manhunt before they finally cornered him at a hotel on the coast. That Mazatlan safe house showed something important. Even when Chapo thought he was safe, even when he was relaxing, he never stopped being paranoid. Every location had an exit. Every room had a plan. Los Mochis was where it all came crashing down in 2016 after Chapo's infamous prison escape. This was not a luxury condo. This was a trap house, a last resort hideout when everything else had been compromised. The house itself was nothing special, a 2-story residence in a middle-class neighborhood, but the engineering inside was vintage Chapo. Mexican Marines raided before dawn on January 8, 2016. They breached the front door and found themselves in a firefight with Chapo's bodyguards. 5 sicarios were killed in the shootout, but when the Marines finally cleared the house, Chapo was gone. They found him because of the tunnel. Behind a mirror in the master bedroom was a hidden door. That door led to a ladder going straight down, 60 feet into an underground passage. The tunnel was crude compared to his earlier work, built fast with minimal shoring. It ran underneath 4 city blocks and came up inside a storm drain. But here's the insane part. That storm drain connected to an underground river that ran toward the coast. El Chapo and his lieutenant, El Cholo Ivan, crawled through sewage and underground water for over a mile in complete darkness. They emerged through a manhole cover on the outskirts of Los Mochis, exhausted, covered in filth, and desperate. They carjacked a vehicle and tried to run, but this time there was no next safe house, no backup location. The network had finally failed. Police caught them on the highway just outside the city. That Los Mochis house was the end of the infrastructure empire, the last tunnel, the final escape. But let me take you back to the height of El Chapo's power, because we need to talk about what happened when money stopped being an obstacle. By the mid-2000s, Chapo was earning an estimated $3 billion per year. Forbes listed him as one of the world's most powerful people. His safe houses evolved from functional hideouts into something else entirely. Luxury compounds that were also escape-proof fortresses. Picture this, a mansion in the hills outside Culiacan. From the road, you see high walls, security cameras, and an iron gate. Normal rich person security. Drive through that gate and you enter a different world. The main house has marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and imported furniture from Europe. There is a pool that overlooks the valley, a tennis court, a private zoo with exotic animals, lions, tigers, and panthers, a garage filled with armored SUVs, Ferraris, and Lamborghinis. One compound even had a small airplane hangar. Exotic animals and armored vehicles made the scene feel surreal, but underneath all that luxury, the real infrastructure remained. The master bedroom had a panic room with steel walls 6 inches thick. That panic room connected to a tunnel system that ran under the entire property. That tunnel led to 3 different exit points, one into the surrounding forest, one to a nearby farm, and one that connected to a highway access road where vehicles were always standing by. The tunnel network was the hidden backbone. The security systems were military grade. Motion sensors covered the perimeter. Thermal cameras tracked heat signatures. Armed guards rotated in 12-hour shifts. Some compounds had anti-aircraft weapons positioned on the roof because Chapo was paranoid about helicopter raids. Military-grade defenses were standard. And the communication systems? Encrypted satellite phones, radio equipment that changed frequencies constantly. Some properties had dedicated IT staff maintaining servers that ran Chapo's entire communications network. Encrypted phones and servers kept the operation connected. This is where you see the contrast that defined El Chapo's world. Violence and luxury existing in the same space. A man who would personally execute rivals in the basement of these mansions, then go upstairs and swim in his pool. A man who lived surrounded by beauty and death, paranoia and pleasure. The luxury was not just about comfort. It was about power, about showing his organization and his rivals that he had ascended beyond the mountains of Sinaloa. He was not just a trafficker anymore. He was an empire. But that luxury also made him vulnerable. The more visible the wealth, the easier it became for authorities to track him. Every property purchase, every construction project, every luxury car left paper trails that US and Mexican intelligence could follow. The tunnels kept him free, but the luxury began to close the walls around him. Now let's talk about the human element, because El Chapo's safe house network wasn't just about engineering. It was about people, and people are always the weakest link. El Chapo moved constantly between his properties, but he never moved alone. He traveled with his wife, Emma Coronel, his mistresses, at least 3 women he maintained long-term relationships with, his sons who were being groomed to take over the empire, his trusted bodyguards who had been with him for decades, and his communications team who kept him connected to the outside world. Each relationship represented both protection and risk. His wife Emma knew locations that even his top lieutenants did not. She could move freely across the border between the United States and Mexico. She was an American citizen, and she served as his connection to his lawyers and financial network. But loving El Chapo also meant living in hiding, moving from safe house to safe house, and never staying anywhere longer than a few weeks. His mistresses were housed in different cities, each believing she was special, and each kept in luxury apartments with their own security details. These women became vulnerabilities. Authorities tracked their movements, monitored their phone calls, and used them to map El Chapo's network. His sons were even more complicated. They wanted power, but lacked their father's discipline. They made mistakes. They flaunted wealth on social media. They threw parties that attracted attention. And attention is death in the underground world. But here is what is fascinating. Emotional ties also saved El Chapo repeatedly. His people were loyal in ways that law enforcement could not break. Guards who went to prison rather than talk. Family members who moved money and passed messages without ever betraying him. A network of informants throughout Mexican law enforcement warned him before raids, giving him time to disappear. The most famous example happened in January 2016 when actor Sean Penn and Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo traveled to one of Chapo's jungle hideouts for an interview. That meeting was tracked by both US and Mexican intelligence. They knew where Chapo was, but by the time they could organize a raid, he was already gone, warned by contacts inside the Mexican government. Loyalty bought him years of freedom, but loyalty has limits. In the end, it was his own people who brought him down. Phone intercepts from his communications team, GPS data from his security coordinators, financial records traced through family members. The network that protected him for so long eventually became the evidence that convicted him. Every safe house, every tunnel, every escape route was documented by his own organization's communications. You cannot run an empire without communication, and you cannot communicate without leaving traces. The human element gave him power. The human element destroyed him. Let me take you inside that February morning in 2014, because this is where you see everything Chapo built put to the ultimate test. US intelligence had finally penetrated his communications network through a specialized phone tracking operation. They knew he was in Mazatlan. They knew the building. They knew the floor. Dawn, February 22nd, 2014. The Marines moved in fast, storming the lobby, racing up the stairs. Chapo's guards opened fire, buying precious seconds. And in those seconds, Chapo made his move. He ran into the bathroom, slammed the door, hit the button. The bathtub lifted up with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a concrete shaft dropping straight down into darkness. Chapo didn't hesitate. He climbed down the metal ladder built into the wall, pulling the bathtub closed above him. Now picture this, 60 feet straight down into a tunnel system that Chapo's engineers had spent months constructing. The tunnel was narrow, barely 3 feet wide, but it was lit with LED strips, powered by a generator hidden underground. The floor was concrete, sloping downward toward Mazatlan's storm drain system. Chapo moved through this tunnel in complete darkness once he got past the first section, because the LED lights ran out. He knew the route by feel. His hands touched the walls, his feet found the right turns. Behind him, Marines were discovering the bathtub entrance, calling for engineers and tunnel specialists. The tunnel branched. One direction led to a dead end, a decoy. The other led to an opening into the storm drains. Chapo took the correct branch, emerged into the larger drainage system, and started running through standing water and sewage in the dark. These storm drains ran for miles underneath Mazatlan, connecting the entire city's drainage system. Chapo came up through a manhole cover 3 blocks from the condo building, emerged into morning sunlight looking like a homeless person, and immediately started looking for a car. He carjacked a white Volkswagen at gunpoint, forced the driver out, and drove toward the outskirts of the city. The Marines were still searching the tunnel system. For 2 days, Chapo went ghost. He had backup safe houses in Mazatlan, but they were all being watched. He had money and weapons stashed at various locations, but he couldn't risk moving during daylight. He holed up in a cheap hotel on the coast, using cash to pay, giving a fake name. But Mexican intelligence had something new: the complete phone records of everyone in Chapo's inner circle. They tracked calls to that specific area of Mazatlan. They narrowed it down to 3 possible hotels, and on February 24th, 2014, they found him. The Marines hit the hotel at dawn. This time, there was no tunnel. Chapo was sleeping. They breached the door and had him in handcuffs before he could even stand up. The man who had escaped from maximum security prisons. The man who had evaded capture for over a decade. The man who had built an underground empire that law enforcement couldn't penetrate. He was arrested in his underwear, unarmed, completely vulnerable. The tunnel network that had saved him dozens of times couldn't save him anymore, because in the end, it wasn't about the infrastructure, it was about intelligence. His communications network had been completely compromised, So how did it all come crashing down? How did the most elaborate escape network in criminal history finally fail? Let me tell you what actually destroyed El Chapo's empire, because it wasn't guns or soldiers or prison walls. It was technology. In 2009, the DEA and Mexican intelligence launched a joint operation specifically targeting Chapo's communications network. Not his drugs, not his money, his communications. They developed custom malware that infected the encrypted phones his organization used. They monitored satellite phone signals. They tracked every call, every text, every email coming out of his network. Chapo thought he was being smart. He changed phones constantly. He used encrypted systems. He never talked directly about operations. He always spoke in code. But modern signals intelligence does not need you to say specific words. They track patterns. They map relationships. They follow the money and the messages until the entire network becomes visible. By 2014, U.S. intelligence had a complete map of Chapo's organization. They knew who reported to whom. They knew the locations of his safehouses based on where his lieutenants traveled. They knew his routines, his preferences, his paranoia patterns. And then came the betrayals, not dramatic, movie-style betrayals, quiet ones, low-level operators who got arrested and decided to cooperate rather than face decades in prison, mid-level lieutenants who made deals to protect their families, financial coordinators who traded information for reduced sentences. Each betrayal gave authorities another piece of the puzzle, another safe house location, another tunnel entrance, another communications protocol. Chapo's fatal mistake was overconfidence. He had escaped so many times, from prisons, from raids, from impossible situations, that he started believing his own legend. He got sloppy. He stayed in locations too long. He met with people who were being monitored. He trusted family members who were under surveillance. The 2014 Mazatlan capture should have been the end. But then came the 2015 prison escape. Through a mile-long tunnel his organization built directly into Altiplano maximum security prison. It was one of the most audacious escapes in history. But that escape was also his downfall. The Mexican government was humiliated, and humiliated governments do not stop hunting. They put every resource into finding him. They partnered with U.S. intelligence at a level that had never existed before. When they caught him in Los Mochis in January 2016, it was different. The Mexican government immediately began extradition proceedings. There would be no more Mexican prisons that Chapo could escape from. This time, he was going to the United States. On January 19, 2017, El Chapo was extradited to the United States. He was placed in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, a prison facility that had held terrorists, mob bosses, and the worst criminals America had ever prosecuted. There were no tunnels under the Metropolitan Correctional Center, no hydraulic bathtubs, no escape routes into storm drains, just concrete and steel and 24-hour surveillance. In July 2019, El Chapo was convicted on all counts, including drug trafficking, money laundering, murder conspiracy, and leading a criminal organization. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Today, he sits in a DX Florence in Colorado, America's supermax prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. He is in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, no contact with other prisoners, no phone calls except with his lawyers, no possibility of escape. The man who built the most elaborate escape network in criminal history is now in a prison specifically designed to be impossible to escape from. The safe houses are abandoned now. The tunnels have been filled in or repurposed by other organizations. The luxury compounds have been seized by the Mexican government. But the legend remains. El Chapo proved something that law enforcement still has not figured out how to counter. With enough money, enough engineering expertise, and enough paranoia, one man can become nearly impossible to catch. He showed that the ground beneath our feet is the final frontier of smuggling, that you can build an empire in the spaces between visibility and invisibility. His network was not defeated by better policing or stronger borders. It was defeated by betrayal and technology, by the very communication systems he needed to run his empire becoming the evidence that convicted him. There is a lesson in that about power and vulnerability, about how the infrastructure that makes you powerful can also make you visible, about how the human element, loyalty, and betrayal ultimately matters more than concrete and steel. El Chapo built tunnels that ran for miles, but he could not tunnel his way out of his own organization. That is the real story of the secret safe houses, the elaborate tunnels, the luxury hideouts. Not that they existed, but that eventually, inevitably, they failed. Because no infrastructure is perfect, no network is completely secure, no escape route lasts forever. The king of the underground now lives in a box above ground, surrounded by walls he can never tunnel through. And somewhere in the Sierra Madre Mountains, in villages like La Tuna, where this all started, the next generation is already learning the terrain, already planning their own hideouts, already believing they will be the one who never gets caught. The cycle continues, but the tunnels, for now, are silent.